An alternative to that classical view might be the prototype view. Representations do not rely on necessary and sufficient aspects under the prototype model. And there's a clever example here that actually comes from an early piece of research dating to the 50s, I suppose. There was one other experiment that I'm thinking of goes to the 30s. A prototype view of concepts and categories refers to a family resemblance structure of concepts, a structure in which each member has a number of features sharing different features with different members. Few, if any, features are shared by every member of the category. However, the more features that a member possesses, the more typical it is. So this provides, figure 8.6, which we're looking at right here, provides an example of family resemblance. Notice that the Smith brothers, modeled after a marketing campaign for cough drops, have several shared features: light hair, bushy mustaches, large ears, and eyeglasses. Not every Smith brother has every feature, but the brother in the middle, having them all, would likely be judged by the Smith friends to be the most typical Smith. Notice that he shares the big ears, everything, in the 10 o'clock position, and shares a mustache and big ears with the brother at the 7 o'clock. Different pairs of brothers share different features. So I might describe the guy in the middle as the most prototypical brother. He's the one that is most, I guess you could say, representative of these Smith brothers. And you can think about that with cars. What's a prototypical car? It might be the Ford Fusion or the Toyota Camry or some kind of mid-sized car that maybe has 4 doors. But what would be an atypical car, although it still is a car, is the most souped-up Corvette that you can think of, or the largest Nissan Armada, one of the largest SUVs. They are vehicles too, but a car tends to be one that shares the most features with every other car. Certainly on the far end would be one of those slingshots that you may have seen, one of those really sporty vehicles. So thus robins are better birds than emus because they're smaller and they fly. They're more prototypical. They come to mind more easily. They're recognized quicker. Here's another idea. A 55-year-old unmarried male is a better bachelor than an 18-year-old. Now, strictly speaking, if they were both unmarried, they would both be bachelors. But we don't think of as an 18-year-old as a bachelor, even if he is, because he really hasn't had much of a chance to marry yet, and he's really more of a youth than a bachelor. But nonetheless, he is a bachelor, strictly speaking. So a prototype then is some kind of abstraction that includes all the characteristic features of the category. It may or may not be an actual instance of a category. So, for instance, I could be in development of a car right now that looks very much like a car, but isn't a car yet. However, it's a very prototypical car, theoretically. We could think of it that way. So, now, there are some levels of categorization that we have to think of to consider prototypes. There's the basic level, like a guitar or a piano. Subordinate. So, for instance, within the realm of guitars, I have classical guitars, folk, pianos, grand piano, and upright, etc. Those are subordinate, and superordinate are musical instruments. So, it may be the case that the basic level of categorization comes down to musical instruments, but I have ways that I can divide even within that realm. So the prototype view is not wholly free of problems, as elegant as it is. For one thing, it fails to capture people's knowledge about the limits of concepts. To illustrate, even though a Chihuahua seems in many ways similar to a cat and a Great Dane, the Chihuahua and Great Dane are classified together as dogs. The prototype view has a hard time telling us why. It's just sort of something that emerges as a clever idea, but it can't explain much. The prototype view has a hard time telling us why. And unlike the classical view, which sets constraints or boundaries around which things can and can't belong, the prototype view does not specify constraints. And it's a little bit amorphous, kind of satisfying intellectually, but it's hard to pin down. So people's main job in categorizing, then, is to pick up information about the world's regularities, not to impose arbitrary groupings. Another problem for the prototype view has to do with typicality ratings. These authors showed that the typicality of an instance depends on some extent on context. So Although a robin may be seen as a typical bird in the context of birds you see in the neighborhood, it's atypical of birds I'd see in a barnyard, which would be more likely of chickens. These findings contrast with the idea of a member of a category has a certain level of typicality. It depends on where you are. So a bird in Africa could be a much larger bird, etc. Certainly Australia, where they have very unusual birds. So typicality apparently varies with the context, and on the face of it, the prototype view doesn't police that.